Hey everyone, my name is Nick Lambert. I'm the CEO of Doc Labs, and welcome to our latest live event. Today's topic is the EU Digital Identity Wallet explained. And so we have a very esteemed guest in Esther Makaay, who is the Vice President of Digital Identity at Signicat. How are you, Esther? Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm doing well. There's a lot going on, but thank you for organizing this.
You're very welcome. We'll have a nice conversation about I'm obviously Scottish, so having a nice conversation about the origins of your surname, which definitely looks distinctly like a Scottish name to me. So it was good to get a little bit unusual context from you before we get the ball rolling. In terms of this session today, I'm really excited about it. And the reason for that is because the EU Digital Identity Wallet is a massive topic. It seems amorphous. It seems to almost change daily. And we get asked about it a lot. And I think that your slides, having had a very sneak peek through them, forgive me for doing that, Esther, look to bring together and consolidate a lot of the information into a really good high-level overview. You're kind of looking at things like timelines, use cases, business cases, some reasons for concern, some reasons for optimism. So I think it's got a really, really nice balance. So I very much look forward to you doing that. So the first 25, 30 minutes of this session or so will be Esther running through that for us, followed by a kind of 15-minute Q&A between Esther and myself, and then we'll open it up to the audience who are obviously listening here. If you have questions, of course, you know the drill. Please put them into Riverside, which is the kind of web app you're listening and watching this event on. And also, if you could let us know once we get started that you're there, and also where you're joining us from, that would be really helpful for us. We'll obviously pick out some of those questions and ask as many as we can to Esther, who is going to absolutely be a fountain of knowledge for us. So we're looking forward to that. So without further ado, Esther, if I could pass over to your capable hands, and if you could start us off, that would be great. And maybe you could give a very quick intro to yourself just as you're bringing up your deck.
Yeah, of course, I'm now fighting with my screens. Basically, I'm the VP of Digital Identity for Signicat. I've been working on the wallets for just over 2 years now, submerged completely in the large-scale pilots. And yes, as you said, this is a fast-moving environment. The core slide deck that I use, I have to update it every 2 to 3 weeks because things change continuously. And I'd love to post about it on LinkedIn or anywhere else, but it's just, there's too much going on to keep track, and work needs to be done as well. My background is in internet technology. I started in the 90s with building the internet, mainly under the hood. And I moved on to identity management. I've been in identity management for almost 15 years now, and then latched on to EIDAS, which I'm going to start off with as well. So if you're looking at European EIDs, that's, around the turn of the century, we saw them arise, being used for authentication onboarding. Europe has a very strong government-driven set of EIDs, but also driven from banks and other trusted entities. And then legislation, EIDAS, in 2014 gave a real driver to this market. And now, again, 2024, we saw EIDAS give the push for wallet adoption. If you want to know more about European EIDs, look at this report, which compares the state of digital identity in Europe for 16 countries. And the slides will be shared, or I shared them with you guys, so please distribute so people can click on links. Now, even though many of the European countries do have a longer history with EIDs and usage, the usage rate is very different. And I always find it fascinating that even a digitally mature country like Germany, for example, still is sort of hanging there in 22% of usage. There's very good reasons for that, but there's differences in Europe as well. So let's talk about the wallets. In in all of its context. So roughly, member states are required to issue a wallet and identity to all citizens, which means that everyone in the EU or the extended European area will have for free access to a mobile national EID. What for free means is still under debate, but let's leave it at that. It will have a government-grade assurance. It will be usable with not just public, but also private service providers across borders, and extensible with verified attributes from different sources. Specifications, though, are still work in progress, and the target launch by the member states is December 2026. That's when this comes into force. So we'll see the first deployments during this year, and we're already seeing some. So what does that mean? You'll have a wallet app on your phone, but it will be certified by a specific member state, and that member state will also add PID, so personal identification data, into that wallet, making it a national identity. And then you can add all sorts of other information to it, like your driving license, your diploma, payment cards, passport, but also tickets, boarding passes. You think of it, it could be in there. This is part of EIDAS. Now, EIDAS is a European regulation. It covers EIDs and trust services. So it regulates that national digital identities can be used across borders. And the same goes for trust services. And trust services are what I call notary services. So think of signing or certificates, things you would normally, in a paper world, go to a notary for to have it certified. And now you can do that digitally. And there's a new version that also states that all countries will provide an identity wallet, storing that identity in it, and it contains more and updated trust services. And in the political sphere, please do not call it EIDAS 2. They're very sensitive because it's not a version 2, but use, EDI framework or whatever. But the full title is in there. It's nothing I can remember. Now, wallets come with an ecosystem, and the ecosystem, I would say, is way more important than the wallet. And this is taken from the architecture reference framework. I'll get to that later. And it depicts all the roles in this ecosystem. So in the center, you can see the wallet unit with the user. To the right is the relying party and the wallet provider and device suppliers below that. And then to the left, basically, is a group of roles that push stuff into the wallets. And these are all being regulated. So you've got the PID provider, the identity provider, which is a member state role. You've got attestation providers in 3 different flavors, qualified, coming from a public source, or non-qualified, and you've got signatures. And then around that, there's a whole bunch of trust certification. You can read through it. And my company, Signicat, is going to play a role in many of these areas. Okay, this is a European thing. If they come with this type of legislation, how to get the ecosystem going? Well, first there's a legislation. And right now that's the revised EIDAS regulation saying you must issue a wallet and identity. And then it comes with, could be up to 45 or more implementing acts, which is lower level legislation, but still legislation, defining all the specifics to that. Then there's specifications and the architecture reference framework, which is a guidance to the technical implementation, but it's not the law, although a lot of member states will point to it and say you must follow it. Next, there's a reference implementation wallet, because everyone understands that for many countries this is maybe a lot to handle. So there's work being done on an open source wallet that can be downloaded by member states and then, colored in with their country flag and their language and be used for their own wallets. And last but not least, there's sort of a testing of the ecosystem and the use cases, which is mainly done by large-scale pilots, which are funded projects involving public and private sector participants. And basically their assignment is, show and tell of the ecosystem. Just make sure it works. The implementing acts are very relevant because the legislation is quite high over. So the implementing acts really tell the details. And we've seen the first batch adopted in November. We're waiting for the second batch. It was in public review, but given the differences between the version in public review for November and the version that got adopted, we're not sure what will be in it. It was quite a different version, also based on all the comments that were made. And then we'll see a third batch in May 2025. And what's good news is that all the implementing acts will be reopened and updated annually as needed. And this is very relevant because they refer to a lot of standards and specifications that are not ready yet. For example, ETSI is working on a lot of standards for the trust services that are expected later this year. So the ones that are going to be published in March and May will not be able to reference them yet, but they will do so in the next version. So right now we've got EIDAS. We've got ARF 1.6. Well, I think it's even 1.6.1 by now. So we had months with no updates, and now there's 3 or 4 in a row. So that's moving quickly. First implementing acts adopted, second batch in review, and the large-scale pilots that are running are in their final phase. They're all wrapping up mid of this year. And these are the timelines. And what you can see is that so the current large-scale pilots, and I'll give you an overview next, will wrap up somewhere between June and October, depending on the extensions that they requested. There's 2 new large-scale pilots kicking off mid of this year. And then the real deadlines are that by December 2026, all member states must issue a wallet and identity. And by December 2027, so 1 year later, all regulated industries must start accepting the wallets. And I'll get back to that later. So these are the current large-scale pilots. There's 4 of them. They're listed here. From Signicat, we're involved in the European Identity Wallet Consortium, EWC, working on travel, payments, and organizational identity. It's a large consortium. Lots of things happening there. But also in Nobit, their only focus is on payments, and they come from Nordic, Baltic, and Italian governments, and they're focusing mainly on account-to-account payments. Next to those 2, there's Potential, which includes most of the current European governments, and they work on a lot of different use cases, including driving license and e-government services. And I know they had a very successful testing event last week for the driving license and MDoc attestations. And last but not least, DC4EU, which includes the educational sector, social mobility, and also focuses on different types of technology. So not the core PKI based approach, but they're really looking into alternative approaches. We had a call for new large-scale pilots, and 2 have been awarded. Since we're present in the WeBuild consortium, I know quite a bit about that one because, we're involved, and they're going to focus on organizational identity through use cases in business, supply chain, and payments. And of course, it will include natural persons and their interactions, but the focus will be on business wallets and legal person identity, which is completely different from natural persons. And there's one called Aptitudes, which will focus on travel and payments. But since they just have been awarded, not all of them have formal communications, and WeBuild just had a first version of their website. And we expect the grant agreements, so the project agreements, defining these pilots to be signed in the mid of April. If we're looking at the business focus so far of all of these pilots, then for payments, what we can see is that if any which way you can combine identity verification through a wallet with payments, then the fraud rates really drop over 95%. That's impressive. But if you know the payment world, then you know that liability, especially in the context of AML and KYC, is very relevant. and liability in the context of EIDAS is not really addressed. So if the data proves to be unreliable, what's the liability? Is, how much value could I put to it for usage? That's very unclear and something that's being heavily debated right now. Travel, well, you think about, government border control, digital passports, but that's a very closed ecosystem. And what struck me as news was that one of the first things that they are going for example, is, self-attested passport. So you take your phone, you upload your passport as an attestation, and then you share the passport document details. Most of the travel agencies are involved are not that concerned about the self-attestation. It's just not having a typo. If you mix an O for a 0 and you show up at the airport, you're denied boarding. And that happens so often. If you fill out your first name differently because you're called John, but your real name is Johannes, and you mix that up, it could go wrong. And I have to report, this has happened last week in EWC. We had the first real ferry ticket from a Greek ferry, booked and paid for through Visa with a Romanian bank with an EUDI wallet. So this is our first show and tell here. It does work. And the person who did that is now out of office, so I presume she actually boarded the ferry as well. Then organizational identity. Everyone thinks payments is the biggest ecosystem out there, but I suspect that business to business might be bigger. It's less specific, but it might be bigger, and lots of use cases involve data access on various levels and data sharing. And one of the concerns there is that most governments do not really understand the concept of organizational identity. They understand the concept of ultimate business owners, of power of attorney, but actually having a legal person and assign an identity to that is very complex and also embedded in lots of national history. And the governmental use cases, of course, they will be a primary driver for this whole market because it will involve that core identity, the driving license, with all sorts of governmental data being exposed through attestations in the wallet. So this is what we're looking at. Now, we do have quite a bit of concerns. First and foremost, we're looking at a very fragmented wallet landscape because for now, every wallet needs to be certified on a national level. And it will be certified not as a wallet, but as a combination of a wallet, identity, and onboarding. That will be the certification scheme, meaning that even a wallet coming from a non-public organization that is, out there for governments to use, it needs to be certified for each member state and each identity scheme separately. And also the existing EIDs like Neue Personalausweis or Bank ID, they're not going to evaporate because there's wallets. So they will coexist for a longer time. Like I said, many of the standards and specifications that we're using are fairly immature. They're first versions, still wet, not even complete versions, and never tested on a large scale in real life. So this is a challenge. Legal persons out there, different concepts in each member state. They're doing a lot of work to harmonize, but still it's a long-term history that you're dealing. And if you read EIDAS or the implementing acts and you do not understand, certain phrases or paragraphs, just change wallet for EID and it will start making sense. The legislation is being written from the concept of an EID and not really understanding a wallet. And so the data sharing is very much neglected, the whole depth and width of it. And I'm also concerned that we see a lot of burdens for private sector and low assurance use cases. So there's a lot of requirements. There's hardly any distinction between qualified and non-qualified issuing. Relying parties, all relying parties, everyone who wants to engage with a wallet needs to be registered on a member state level with national policies. And I'm afraid that everyday usage, which you need, where you need low assurance use cases for, will be a very tough sell in this case. Meanwhile, the expectations are all over. I mean, if you look at the communication, this is taken from the website of the European Commission. You can open a bank account, share your education credentials, collect prescribed medication, check into flights. This is all going to be possible. However, I don't know if anyone started talking to a pharmacy yet to ask them what is needed for them to give me medication if I show up with my phone. So that's why I'm always referring, and everyone working in product knows this slide. So if you want to build a car, but you're not there yet, then you go for what they call minimal viable product. You don't start throwing out 4 wheels and then moving on to some headlights and add a door, because the customer won't be happy. So you start with a little scooter step that's moving. Customer isn't happy, but hey, it moves. Go to a bike, still not that happy. But once you get to the moped phase, you know, they'll be working with it. Now, the trick here is that we're not talking about a car here. We're talking about public transport and very modern bullet train type of public transports. And then looking at the LSPs, well, this is a month ago. I'd say we were there. We have a push cart. We know it works. I'd say we're moving here, looking at the ferry ticket. But big warning, there still is a lot to cover before we get anywhere near that car. Some optimism, because there's a lot of difference. Like I said in the beginning of my presentation, Scandinavian countries use their bank ID-based solutions or other very sophisticated solutions almost daily. So they're looking at these wallets saying, why do we need this? But if I talk to my Romanian colleagues or even the Spanish ones, having a level of assurance high EID in every member state that you can also use in private sector services is such a big step forward. And there will be a basis for data sharing, trusted data, verifiable data. And last but not least, this is the first time ever that we've seen agile legislation. Honestly, this hasn't happened before. So the wallets are definitely coming. There's still people say, it's never going to happen. No, this is happening as we speak. One of the things I always point out to my customers, and I think it could be relevant to you as well, is this mandatory acceptance for regulated industries. What does it mean? Well, regulated means that if you are required by national or European law to use strong authentication for your services. So if you fall under PSD and it says strong customer authentication, or you have a national law that says you must use strong authentication, then you're targeted. And that means that you must accept these wallets as an option for strong authentication. You can still use other authentication means. You can use your own ones or existing solutions, but you must also accept the wallets. And you're exempt if you're a micro or small enterprise by EU definition, not your local definition. And of course, be aware that all transactions that are doing with verification or identity proofing, so not pure authentication, are also exempt. That's different. So for onboarding, there's no one that says you must rely on this wallet. Although a lot of people want to know, should I? Could I? Because it's there. And so pay attention, prepare your roadmap. If you need to be compliant, of course, but also if, in many countries, there's no good alternative to your own user accounts or using social logins. So maybe this is a new option for you, having this trusted authentication means. But also if right now you are spending money on identifying your users and verifying their data, this might be something that, in that wallet, there might be certain attributes or identity information that you can use that you don't have to verify yourself. But also, how many of you are asking your customers to share documents? Please email me a PDF, or, you have a portal, you can upload your stuff there. if you work with online forms, because the wallet might really help you there, give you trustworthy data, documents from verifiable resources that are pretty tamper-proof. So please, yes, do that. And thank you for this. Well, I think that was...
that was great. Yeah, thanks for running through that, Esther. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know you're trying to keep it brief, and you did admirably there as well, keeping it very kind of close to time. So just so much information to get through and unpack there. I was kind of a couple of things that I picked up that I've been kind of mistaken about is I've been calling it EIDAS 2, and I think you said quite early on that would be offensive to some people, so I'll need to mind that.
It is okay. I just noticed that a lot of the policymakers have a sensitivity in that area, and it's not EIDAS 2.
Got it.
They don't like it. So call it the EDI framework, or, they're happy.
Got it. Yeah, of course. And the other thing I didn't appreciate as well is the reference wallet being used effectively. What you described in my head was almost like a white label wallet where member states that didn't necessarily have the technical chops or the resources to build their own could actually effectively rebrand an existing wallet.
And it's not just a wallet. It has a lot of libraries. If you go, there's links in my slides all around. And I think I pointed to the main EC website, and that has links to the GitHub page where they do their new releases. So,
perfect.
You could toy around with it. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. And we will share, we'll need to figure out with our marketing head, Francisco, exactly how we're going to distribute that, but probably come out with the recording, maybe just as a PDF inside that email. But we'll certainly be making sure your slides are shared, Esther, and it's great that you've put that resource together.
If needed, I will push out all the links and all the look here on LinkedIn. No problem.
Perfect. Esther, do you get some kind of sense of maybe it's too early to say, but just kind of being absolutely immersed in that world, do you get a sense of how many member states will actually be going through with wallet projects and infrastructure projects by themselves, and how many will require to use that kind of reference model? I mean, obviously Germany's one that's really moving, putting a lot of resources into this, but do you get a sense of how many of the 27 EU member states will actually need to use a white label wallet effectively?
Well, I think it's not just having to use, but also winning, because many of the member states already have projects and a roadmap on digital identity. And like, for example, Belgium, they were working on a mobile app. They were pushing it out. And I'm getting very confused by their communication now, because it sort of looks and smells like this is going to be their wallet, but I know they've been on their own roadmap, so I'm not sure to what extent it's aligned. Yeah. And I know the Netherlands is sort of a hotspot for wallet initiatives. We already had a handful of operational wallets before this came up, but still the government is building their own wallets as well. So there's lots of things happening. I know of about 8 to 10 countries that are working on this one way or another. To what extent it really aligns to the current specifications, it remains to be seen. Also, it's costly for them to set up. So many countries will start with a very basic wallet with identity that probably will support some attestation issuing and verifying, and then start working towards a mobile driving license and move from there. I'm really curious how many countries will be open to the idea of certifying multiple wallets, mainly from the standpoint that if your own, pretty very national wallet, even if it's built on the reference implementation, turns out to have serious vulnerabilities, what's your fallback? Yeah. Because you can't tell people to, hold off with what you're doing for a few months until we figure this out. Yeah. But having different certification schemes will be costly. So I'm a bit, concerned.
And in itself, it might not be a great, like you say, in that particular example where you do have like a significant vulnerability, it would definitely be good to have others you can draw upon. But also, I could see downsides to having multiple wallets within a country as well. I mean, that can be, not only costly, but kind of difficult to manage as well. I can see good points on that.
from a purely technical point of view, we always said that the wallet should have been a trust service. It should have been, agnostic from national implementation or adaptation. However, this choice has been made for various good reasons. What I do hope for is that ENISA right now is working on a certification scheme for all of Europe. And once that is ready, all of the wallets will need to adhere to that certification scheme, which will take a lot of the burden away from the member states. However, it'll take them at least 3 to 5 years to get there. So, 2030, fingers crossed. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So you kind of talked about the the different consortia that exists, and I think there's kind of 4 live and a couple up and coming, like you said. I think Signicat involved in, I think, 2 of those. Is that right? The EWC one and then the kind of Dutch one that's coming through.
I'm personally in EWC responsible for interoperability and testing. So,
got it.
The core, the under the hood part is something that
you're absolutely living that stuff. Oh, very good.
Yeah.
What are some of the key learnings that you've had? Is there any commonality across at least the projects that you're involved in or the consortia that you're involved in, Esther? Are you seeing some patterns or some kind of key learnings that are coming out of those pilot schemes that you could maybe share with us, please?
Yeah, I think one of the main concerns that I'm seeing, especially when working with payments and travel, is that one size does not fit all. If you look at legislation and the core of the ARF, this is really written from a very government-centric perspective. So governments issuing identity to their citizens, wanting to support their citizens in e-governmental services. And that's very valuable. But you can't take that set of rules and requirements and then, push it onto payments on travel. And then with payments and travel, there's a new layer coming into it because it turns out this is not European, this is global. Airlines do not stop at, and they must interact as well. They have their own authorities and their own ecosystems that you also need to work with. So that's a very complicated thing because there's so much regulation on one end and so much that you can't really regulate because it doesn't belong to your domain. So this is very complex also in the way of trust mechanisms. And there's a lot of push to regulate this and make it really trustworthy and protect citizens and add privacy and security into it, which is absolutely great, but it doesn't scale well when applied to all the other domains, and that sort of concerns me. So I'm hoping, right now in EWC we have about a dozen wallets from different providers. So interoperability really is a challenge. And what you see is that there's sort of a core set of functionalities, basic issuing, basic verifying with selective disclosure, that can be achieved. But once you step out and you go to payments, you need a whole different set of functionalities to support. And if you go to signing, and I mean remote signing, so based on remote services, which you enter pretty quickly when you enter document management systems, multi-party signing, that sort of thing. Wallets need to be able to do a lot more than just, exchange attestations. And on top of that, there's a whole discussion also when it comes to trust and checking, doing all the checks and balances, is you can push it all to the wallet, you can push it all to the relying party. I think neither is the right choice. So we should really talk about who is responsible for what and how does that work. And then on top of that, of course, the wallets do not live in a vacuum. So you've got an operating system, whether it's a mobile device, you've got services that could be web-based, that could be browser-based. So right now, we're in the heat of the discussion on browser APIs, DC APIs, that are a real support when it comes to functionality, but also bring new risks as to who controls what. And of course, we don't have any European browsers or operating systems, so that's a bit of a sensitive area again. So there's Real soon covered.
Maybe a European company could buy it. I see that Chromium is going to get forced out of Google, well, unless it's fought, but that looks like what the DOJ in the US are doing. So maybe a European company could buy that and we'd be okay, Esther.
No, if here I go back to my roots. If we do not trust an operating system or a browser anymore, well, not any, I mean, in general, what are we doing on the internet then? Then we should, get back. And the worst thing that would come out of this is a European internet. Let's not go there. I mean, there's a lot to be improved, but let's not do that. Let's work with what we've got and also acknowledge the risks in there. Yeah,
absolutely. Yes, that would be most certainly off topic if we end up spending a lot of time talking about European internet, but we might get crucified online. Let's not do that. I was interested actually, Esther, you're talking about use cases. We talked about, you talked a little bit about seamless travel. I'm adding the word seamless, but that's I think what the vision could be for kind of using travel inside of these wallets potentially if it's taken all the way to its potential, I guess. I was interested during your presentation, you talked about travel agents being happy with self-attestation, which
for now as a first goal. No. They have. I just. I'm sorry, I can't share it yet. It will be later. But
okay.
I was presented today with the whole, seamless passenger flow and passenger information that is coming out of EWC right now, where they're really looking at how to integrate this, because that's another thing.
Right.
You can't come up with a solution in a vacuum.
Yes.
I mean, if you look at an airport, there's all these terminals, there's all these systems. If you book a flight, this is a given, and no one is going to change their complete system setup because you invented a wallet. So it needs to work in that. This is also why EWC had to deal with payments, because have you ever tried booking a flight without a credit card?
That's very difficult.
We needed card-based payments in there. But we're looking at that, and also how that then works with biometrics. The travel industry has been working on the concept of a traveler identity for a long time. And one of the key hurdles there is who is responsible for that identity.
Yeah.
Because usually if you start booking a flight, it starts with the airline, where they're not too happy on, starting to manage people's identities for multiple purposes. But with these wallets, that hurdle is sort of overcome, and now you can work on that.
Yeah.
But they are now, and of course, ICAO is working on the digital travel credentials and all the entries that are needed also to use this for border control. But, having to, if you can eliminate all the typos when booking a flight, that saves you 25% of hurts in support and costs there.
Understood. Yeah, definitely. Very good. Esther, we talked a little bit about kind of the wallet being a commodity of sorts, and a lot of the value, I think, from this is really sitting inside the ecosystem. I mean, personally, I believe that also from a business model perspective. I think the notion that people can monetize wallets is definitely seems to me to be pushing a cart uphill, but I kind of think it's very much inside of the ecosystem. And what kinds of organizations will be responsible for issuing identity attributes into wallets, and how will the trust
that is huge
of these
First
will be
of
assured?
All, a lot of the current wallet providers you see, that comes from the analogy I made to public transport. So, once there's trains riding, everyone will want to use it. But for now, we don't have trains, we don't have tracks, we have nothing. So someone should, push that car up the hill. I'm hoping at some point wallets will become a commodity similar to browsers. But we're not there yet, not by a long shot. And yes, that really worries me. Signicat does not want to be a wallet provider, but making that business case will be a tough one, especially if you do not have, a fancy operating system and some hardware to support it with. But
very good.
We'll see, because there's this government stake in there as well, and the trust will. We haven't seen the end of the changes in this world, and let's not forget the organizational wallets, the business wallets, which will not be apps on a mobile phone.
Yeah.
Because a legal person does not have a mobile phone.
Yeah.
To use, and it doesn't have biometrics. So there's going to be a lot of changes. First and foremost, like I said, the drive will come from governments, governmental data sources, identity, verified address, verified business registrations. Think of anything the government has right now that you every now and then apply for and then get a PDF or a printed version or a copy pushed out. That can be, because normally you don't really need that bit of paper. You need that to start doing something else.
Yep.
So that is very relevant. Then I think, like I said, the other thing is like in travel, ferry tickets, event tickets, entrance fees. When you do payments, if you can collect your receipts, that would be great. But also work permits, certifications. This is typically one of those examples. If you push it out there, if it starts working, then the end is, I even talked to the Digital Car Key Consortium, who are very interested because they have car keys that they want to push into a phone.
Yeah.
But the car key in and of its own is just one piece. They also need a valid driver's license, insurance, the car registration, and this is coming, from all sorts of different places. And the government is not going to push car registration details into a Volvo app.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they might not even push it into your Apple Wallet.
Yeah.
But then again, Volvo might have their own app that also manages details and could be a lot more mature in functionality than the governmental app is.
Got it. Understood. And in terms of like businesses getting involved in this ecosystem, Esther, like we kind of talked about, what I'm really thinking about is incentives to participate in this at this stage. I mean, there really is, I know there's government grants and things that are going, I think they're probably there to provide a percentage of cost rather than be something that companies can make money from. But what are you seeing as the incentives for organizations to get involved at this space at this time? Is it really about just being involved and understanding
it's more than anything, it's wanting to know what the hell is going on and being, having a seat at the table, front row, because there's so much happening. There's only a few people who have an overview, and it's really hard to make sense of it. There's a legislation, there's the ARF, there's the individual providers who already are, in many cases, running an operational service. So you could go out and get a wallet and start using it. But everything is continuously changing. So the main reason to be in these LSPs is to be close to the fire, see what's going on, understand it, and learn from it, and also have a different position for influencing, but whether it's policy or technical stuff. And getting that hands-on experience in having an opinion, seeing what works and what not.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. I'll just ask maybe one more from kind of some of the stuff I had. I mean, as Francisco will probably give me a hard time afterwards because we got through a fraction of all the great questions he prepared.
We could talk about this
we
for
certainly
days.
Could. Yeah. We could, but there's been a ton of really good kind of audience questions as well. So I'm keen to get to those. So my final question for me at least would be, a lot of businesses within the area we're particularly working in is around traditional KYC, onboarding processes, AML, things like that. How do you see this EU Digital Identity Wallet impacting things like KYC, AML?
That's one of the first corners that's going to be hit. So on the one hand, you've got right now there's a lot of companies providing services. I think Signicat does that as well in identity proofing. And lo and behold, here comes a government says, hey, this is the name, date of birth, everything you want to know. There goes part of your business case. However, most governments are notoriously lacking in data. I mean, the only thing they can agree upon ever since 2014 is first name, last name, date of birth. Now, my example, I once heard someone explain that there are 9,000 Hans Müllers living in Germany. So there's bound to be some of them with the same date of birth, right? So who are you dealing with here? I know for a fact that France doesn't have a registered on verified addresses. So in many cases, when you work with KYC AML legislation, you need way more data to rely on. And the government isn't going to be able to present all of that. Yeah. And then if you come into because that's the first step. Now, what the wallet can do splendidly is bind user attributes to a core identity and to the person using that wallet at that time, which is lovely because there's no other channel right now available that can do that. So that's great. But if you want to start checking more risk data or more in depth, are you going to rely on that user to provide you with, look, I'm clean? Because I'm not going to tell you if I'm on a sanction list or on a terrorist list or, using a dodgy SIM card or so everything else you need to still check. So there's lots of room in that area, in verifying that, not in double checking the governmental data, but in enriching it. And then there's also the case of if you go to high risk fraud mitigation, you don't want to talk to that person. You go behind their back, do your checks and balances, and then start talking to them. And of course, some of the information involved in there could be reused. So there's also the lessening of costs. If I have an attestation saying, hey, I've been checked and vetted for something, are you willing to rely on that? Now, this is up to the industry to decide. What we've seen so far is that big banks will do that amongst one another, but, all of the smaller ones can just, do it for themselves. They're not going to get a free lift anywhere. We'll see how this works out.
It's going to be very interesting, isn't it? Yeah. Fantastic. Esther, if we can move into some audience questions now, because I always do a terrible job of getting through a lot of these and we're never quite sure how to deal with them. So let me try and make sure I focus a little bit more on that just now, if I may. First question is from Paul. He says, great presentation, Esther. I'd certainly agree. How do you see the role of intermediaries in solving the chicken and egg problem in the MA ecosystem creation playing out? And I'm not sure what he means by MA ecosystem, so hopefully you do, but I'm not sure.
I don't get it. There's if you're talking about intermediaries in terms of aggregators or brokers or platforms, that I think I was really happy to see the notion of that being brought back into the ARF 1.5 because it was missing all over the place. It seemed to be considered as an outsourcing role for a relying party. Well, I think the biggest chicken and egg problem in the network sphere here is being helped by the fact that governments must, issue a wallet. So yes, that's one end. And then regulated industries must accept it. So there's a lot already being done there. However, if you're a regulated industry, you probably already need to accept all sorts of EIDs. So in the Netherlands, where I live, for example, you have to accept digital e-recognition and the notified EIDs once. Mm-hmm. And there's new legislation allowing private sector solutions in. So there might be 2 or 3 more coming up. And then there's the wallets. And everyone who thinks that this is going to be one wallet with one standardized interface is dead wrong. It's going to be at least 30 wallets, and we're hoping that the core functionality is the same, but there will be little bits and pieces different. So, yes, I think integrators and brokers are very much needed to help this move along and to sort out that complexity that will, it will mature, but it was the same with federated identity. Up until Mobile Connect came up a while ago with OpenID in there, it was SAML. And yes, SAML is one standard. It just has tons of dialects.
Yeah. So it's going to be bumpy at the start, I think, is what you're saying, and it'll obviously improve over time, which you'd expect. Alex's question is, how do you see the adoption of EIDAS? So I think what he means is, how do you see it as in the speed of adoption? So he kind of further adds, so many companies will be affected all over Europe, and not all of them have IT departments such as SMEs. So I guess he's asking, how are you seeing maybe the speed of adoption and the saturation of this technology take place over the coming years? That will be different. For governmental services, this will happen, although current EIDAS also covers a lot of that. And there's a few things that I'm a bit concerned about. One is,
how the various member states will set up their national policies. So there are the current specifications allow for fully online onboarding. However, one of the reasons that Germany is only at 22% of EID usage rates right now is that everyone has this card, this Neue Personalausweis, but you need a PIN to enter online services. Hardly anyone remembers their PIN. Now, they have a process for reissuing that, only it forces you to make an appointment, go to a counter to have it reissued. So that's not happening. Now I'm sort of, I'm hoping not too many countries will have an onboarding process that requires people to make appointments, go to counters, because that will really kill it in those areas, or at least, make adoption run behind. And the other thing that I'm curious about, but we'll see, because that's one of the implementing acts coming out, is the mandatory registration of relying parties. And also, again, each member state can set up their own registration policies, and that could also be it could be an enormous hurdle for some companies to start engaging with the wallets.
And maybe it would be the case, Esther, that there will be kind of countries that get it more right than others, and maybe there'll be the kind of shining lights that others will then realize actually the way they did it was much better, and they'll start to follow. So again, we're going to see some mistakes at the start, as you would expect, and there'll be some inefficiencies, and I'd agree, if you have to actually go and make an appointment in person, that's going to be an absolute disaster. But hopefully we'll see a limited amount of that going on.
Well, it's twofold. So, this is Europe, so it's never going to be pretty, but it works. And at the same time, we also have a lot of regulation. For example, one of the things that I used to say was, listen, there's a few industries who would have loved to sponsor these large-scale pilots if it would resolve their adoption problem across Europe, which is gambling and cryptocurrencies. They're being regulated all over the place right now, and they need solutions to cover all of Europe. Well, the wallet would do that for them. So those type of industries will really benefit from having an approach that works across Europe and not having to take this on a country by country projects for, adhering to all the rules on identity verification that they need to do. Yep. But again, the real, apart from people who are gambling addicts, which I don't think is a great focus group, we really need use cases where people start using this multiple times a week in order to get it moving. Yeah, that won't happen in all countries. Yeah.
That makes sense. Alex gets another question, actually, two for the price of one, Alex. Alex thought that a certification in one member state means automatically being accepted in all member states. Is that correct in principle?
Yes, but, however. So a wallet needs to be certified in one member state together with the issuing of the identity and the onboarding process. So that's the certification scheme, which means that if you're living in Spain, you can only use the Spanish wallets, and the Spanish government will only issue the identity into a Spanish wallet. Mm-hmm. If you happen to have multiple nationalities, or you happen to have an Italian wallet, you can flash it at them. They will say, lovely, we're not going to do that. We're going to issue it into our own wallet. And this has to do with liability and accountability in that scheme. However, once you have that wallet with your identity in it, you can go to any other party in Europe, say, hey, I want to have my event tickets issued in here, or my diploma, or my certification, or prescriptive medicine, or whatever is possible. Yeah. I do expect some other limited restrictions in the early years. So I do expect, for example, that mobile driving licenses might also be limited to your own nation's wallet. But I think that will be eased out pretty soon.
I'd imagine you get some of these big wallet providers that will ultimately kind of fill that gap in time.
But it won't. It won't contain your national identity. So anything bound that needs to be bound to that's the wallet.
Okay. I didn't realize. I didn't appreciate that, Esther. I thought ultimately you get to a point where you'd have a national ID wallet issued by a government, maybe into something like an Apple wallet, if they were to become compliant, of course. But you're saying that will only ever be a national ID wallet.
Yeah, technically, even though it's you download the app, then you go, to your government and say, "Hey, I got your app. Please give me my identity."
Yeah.
The app isn't an official, activated, working European digital identity wallet until there's an active PID present in there. That's also part of the whole. It's in the ARF. Look at it. There's all sorts of flows. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. Thank you for that. Sal asks, will there be a selective disclosure considered in these wallets? I think you mentioned that there was in your presentation.
It's in there. It's not part of the formal legislation yet. This is one of the things that can't be referenced yet legally. But I know for sure all of the wallets in EWC work with that. And I believe Potential also has working versions or is aiming to. Selective disclosure, as he jolted, is sort of a no-brainer. That needs to be in there. And there will also be some level of linkability for certain attestations present, even though zero knowledge proof right now is not viable yet. Yeah.
Got it. And for the uninitiated, selective disclosure enables someone to reveal some attributes on a verifiable credential, but not necessarily all of them, so they can selectively disclose the attributes that they need to satisfy the verifier. There's a question here from Pierce. We're getting kind of close to time here, Esther, which is a great question, actually. Pierce is asking, what are the biggest issues with understanding organizational digital identity? So you spoke a little bit about that. You spoke about organizations not having mobile wallets or biometrics or things like that. And a lot of the technology is applicable here, but there are certainly nuances. So could you delve into those just a little bit for us? What are the big issues around org wallets?
I think we're still discovering this, and there will be a lot coming out of the LSPs in the last few months as we're wrapping up closing, but there's a reason that we're going to take this on into a new LSP as well to further dive into it. First and foremost, a legal entity or an organization is not a physical entity. So with a natural person, when in doubt, I can literally physically grasp you and drag you somewhere. You can't do that with an organization. So the concept of an organization is, it's just that. It's a concept. And if you look at the attributes, even though most of the countries have business registers and all sorts of data, they cannot agree on more than it does have to have an identifier. They think it also should have a name. But that name was a point of major discussion. If you look all across Europe, if you look at all the identifiers right now, there's only one identifier that's present in all of the countries, which is the VAT number. Because I think the reason organizations exist is because the tax authority wants to, extract money out of it. I think that's in the origins somewhere. So getting this together, getting the notion of a legal entity, then knowing that in fact a legal entity is always represented by natural persons, but at the same time it does have services, it does have systems, it does have a car fleet. That makes it really complex in once you start pushing out use cases. And it also, the scope is very fuzzy. So when are you talking about an organization? When are you, in my mind, it works best if you see an organizational wallet as a very, very flexible certificate. So right now, what we're used to is identifying certificates to legal entities, but that's a fixed data set. Now imagine that could be a very flexible data set, and not even a data set, but links to all sorts of registries or data stores. And that's the organizational identity.
Very good.
But there's a lot of discussion still ongoing, and I'm hoping in May of this year, Signicat will do a webinar on wallets. We'll have someone from the private sector, someone from public sector wallets, but also Andrea Servida talking about this. And I'm pretty sure we're going to touch on business wallets as well. Fantastic.
Yeah. Well, we need to make sure that we can get those links over and people can check that out. But Esther, we are up against time now. So Esther Makaay, Vice President of Digital Identity at Signicat. That was a really interesting discussion around the EU Digital Identity Wallet and all the the comings and goings around its formation and all the challenges, but the optimism that is felt within the sector. So I very much appreciate you taking the time to come on and tell us about it. We will share your presentation along with the recording.
What I will do is I will share it on LinkedIn. Maybe that's easiest. And then everyone who still has questions that haven't been answered, I'm not sure if I know all the answers, but just push them there and we'll continue.
We will do that, and we'll make sure we amplify those messages as well, Esther. But you've been extremely generous with your time and also your knowledge, so I won't impose any more. So thank you very much for joining us, and I hope to speak to you again soon.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.